Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this closing session of the virtual AMR conference. I hope you can hear me. There's no feedback here from the system, but okay. So to start off, I would actually say, first of all, that I'm truly honored to moderate this closing session with an extremely great panel that we have today together of speakers. And I'm looking forward to great 90 minutes of discussion. Before we start, I actually want to express my sincere thanks to Biocom, also to my colleagues at Boehme Alliance and the program committee for putting really together an amazing program over the past week. I think it's fair to say that we had a 360-degree overview of the AMR sector. In the main panels, we were talking about the influence that COVID had and has on the AMR sector. We have looked at potentially new business models that will work in the future for AMR. We also had a global perspective, I think more than ever in this conference this year, looking at global markets, but also at the regulatory environments. And we talked about the financing of AMR drug development, but also AMR diagnostics. Besides these main panels, we had really great breakout sessions with experts for the different fields, but also had the opportunity to listen to innovation from companies and academics. So I think really very, very broad overview. And although all of this was virtual, it actually felt really nice to be in touch with all of you again, with our community, and exchange in these really great and enlightening discussions. So thanks for that, and also thanks for all the sponsors without whom this conference obviously would not be possible. With this, I would like to dive into the topic of today. You see here the lineup of the speakers. For today, we have first Dr. Renu Swarup from India. She actually has to leave at 2 p.m., so we will have a discussion and questions directed to her, please, immediately during the chat time. And then we move on to Dame Sally Davies, that we're very honored to have here, Catharina Boehme from FIND, Tiemo Woelken as a member of the European Parliament, and actually vice chair of the interest group for AMR from the European Parliament, and Evan Lowe, the counterpart of the chair of the counterpart of the Boehme Alliance, the Antimicrobials working group in the US, and obviously also CEO of Paratek. If I could get up my slides for the introduction, please. Thank you very much. So diving into the topic today, I think, sorry, I just need to get onto the slides here. Obviously, we are all aware of the burden that AMR already causes today. These numbers are absolutely known to all of us in the field. And even more so, we know the grim outlook that we have for the field in case we don't take the right actions now and act wisely moving forward. I think the general tone of the conference was actually that the glass is half full, as Alex Engel mentioned it when he summarized the survey that he did over the entire AMR sector, and asking lots of SMEs how they actually currently conduct. And I would absolutely like to echo this. The glass is half full. We have achieved a lot in the past years since the first AMR review by Jim O'Neill. We have established a lot of very significant push funding in this space. And in one of the panels, John Rex even stated that we have enough push funding now and can kind of move on. And I have to admit that since the AMR Action Fund now is also going live, I would again agree to this statement. We have, in the magnitude, probably enough. There's minor things that should adjust, especially on the European Union funding for AMR, that needs to be still not improved in size, but more better directed actually against or towards the stakeholders, especially SMEs, to be more efficiently deployed in this field. But generally speaking, really the push side looks pretty good. The question is now, while the glass is half full, I guess everyone would agree that most of these push fundings, if not all, is actually money going to waste if we don't address the main topic that is still not sufficiently solved, which is obviously the pull side of things, so creating new economic incentives. We have to fix the economics around novel antimicrobials. And I take in this first introduction here a bit of a European view as Beam Alliance, but you really see that Europe is, as a continent, at risk already to date to not get access to novel antibiotics. And this is really a crazy statement to make. But on the other hand, we have recently seen that Cipla, the new owner of Plasomycin, actually withdrew their marketing authorization application because of economic reasons for the EMA. And this must be a huge warning call for all of us, and especially European member states, that they are endangered of not getting access to new antibiotics. Thus, we really call for this urgent action on new reimbursement models and new pull mechanisms in the European Union to be implemented as soon and as fast as possible. We actually today, as Beam Alliance, published a call to action paper on this. The link will be visible in my slides later on. And we're extremely happy and proud to show also and to see how many co-signatories we were able to gather to this paper, showing, I think, the incredible amount of unity that we have on a global level with the different organizations and industry to identify this issue and also ask for, with one voice, for the solution. In a nutshell, what does the paper actually ask for on a European level? So we really call to the European Commission to make use of this unique opportunity that is right now up and coming, which is the new pharmaceutical strategy that will be proposed by the EU, and to put a clear statement in there for pull incentives, for a new pull incentive framework. We also asked the European Commission to stimulate the sharing of information for best practices between member states, especially looking at England and Sweden that are already implementing pull mechanisms. And then lastly, we also asked to deliver guidance to member states as to the magnitude of these incentives based on the GDP. As in one of the sessions, Kevin Outterson actually mentioned, there's no bailing out for any country. Everyone must pay its fair share, and the magnitude must be significant, because otherwise we are not going to have a sustainable solution. We also call directly to EU member states to champion for these pull incentives in the European pharmaceutical strategy. And on this panel today later, we will hear a member of the European Parliament, Tiemo Woelken from Germany, which could be really a great opportunity, because Germany is also holds the presidency currently at the European Union, and maybe Germany could be one of the championing advocates for these pull mechanisms to be implemented. We also asked to take advantage of all this existing mapping that is around on the incentives, the different papers that actually describe all these incentives already in detail. So we must not invent new mechanisms, we just need to implement them now. This is extremely important. And then lastly, obviously that the setup and the implementation of these models will be done and also obviously adapted to the national requirements of the member states. For the members of the European Parliament, we really call for them to advocate this importance of the pull mechanisms and to let Europe play again a leading role in the fight against AMR, and thus also secure access for member states. So it's important that the support for and advocacy is there in the Parliament to actually put these pull mechanisms into the pharmaceutical strategy, and that there's an advocacy in the member states at home, basically, to now move forward and implement these pull mechanisms to gain and secure access for life-saving antibiotics. So with this, you see here a screenshot of the paper, and the full paper is available on the Beam Alliance webpage. We also ask you, for anyone that is in support of this paper, to share it via the social media channels. On our Twitter account, you can find links to it and statements, and also on LinkedIn. So while this introduction of mine focused a lot on the European perspective and the European call for action, it is now my great pleasure to actually give the word to our first panelist, Dr. Renu Swarup, Secretary and Head of the Department of Biotechnology in the Ministry of Science and Technology of India, to bring back the global perspective into this discussion and also listen to what can India contribute in terms of pull mechanisms as being a member of the G20 countries. Thank you very much. Is Dr. Renu ready? Sorry, we have to bridge a little bit of time. There seems to be a technical problem to have Dr. Renu live. I would normally suggest. Hello, Dr. Renu. Now we see you and hear you. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, and to you. I think this was a technical glitch before I could really be audible and visible to all of you. Thank you very much. It's such a pleasure to be here today for this 4th AMR conference. And thank you to the organizers for adjusting my timing within the panel, because I definitely wanted to be here, but unfortunately I need to leave straight after this. So thank you so much. The whole issue of AMR has always been so very important. And I think discussing it at a time when we are at the midst of the pandemic makes it all the more important for us. AMR has always been a very major global health issue, and over these many years there have been concerted efforts globally to try and see how we address this. We've looked at it at national levels, we've looked at it at international levels, we've also looked at it at the highest levels of international organizations and various fora, whether it's the UN level or whether it's our WHO or at the various panels that we look at it. And even within our own bilateral engagements, India has been deeply engaged in this conversation as to what is it that we need to do in terms of tackling and fighting this major crisis that we have. We do understand that we need major action, and this action is right from the surveillance to the use of it, to the efficacy, and also then seeing, of course, most importantly, the R&D aspects of it, and how do we look at the R&D and innovation. My own department is engaged in the innovation and R&D and seeing how we could look at new developments, how we could support the researchers, the academia, the startups, and how could we look at being one of the key contributors with all other stakeholders to this international challenge that we have. We all do understand that fundamental research, while we look at antimicrobials, is very, very complex. And there is also the complexity is also because science itself is very risky. The whole biotech sector is very risky. But when you look at this particular area, we know that there is really a risk on the investments that is there, and bringing in the industry to take on the whole area of AMR research makes it all the more complex. And I think because of this market complexity, the risk in terms of the products being ready as per the business plans which have been planned out, I think that's really where we now feel that the engagement from the government becomes most important, because the government is looking at coming into areas and sectors which are risky. but yet there is a huge potential, and AMR is clearly one of those, and that's why the government of India has been keenly involved in this whole aspect that we've been looking at. Globally, as I said, we know what the challenges are. There have been a large number of organizations who've been involved and engaged in this particular initiative. The AMR Hub is one in which India is also a partner, and we're really pleased to be partners in that. We from India have partnered with CARBEX, and we have a large number of other engagements and associations through our bilateral initiatives, whether it's with the government of UK, whether it's part of the Nesta collaboration or the Innovate UK for the Longitude Prize, the WHO collaborations. But I think collectively, while all of us are looking at it, it's important to then see, are these engagements that we have, are they sufficient? Or is it that we need to do much more than this? And I think that really is key for this, because this is a global challenge. And today we all know, when we are looking at fighting the pandemic, how globally we've all got connected. When we talk about energy and environment, again, there is a global connect. I think AMR is today a global challenge which needs all stakeholders to come together. In India, as I said, the government of India is addressing it right at the highest level. We have all concerned ministries of the government engaged in it, whether it's the Ministry of Science and Technology represented by the Department of Biotechnology, which is looking at the R&D and innovation. We have the Indian Council of Medical Research, which is looking at all the biomedical research related aspects, the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare, all the concerned agencies. And we are now trying to see how we could engage all stakeholders, whether it's our academia, whether it's our startup group, or whether it's our industry, bringing a connect between them. And as I said, the engagement is not just at the R&D level, but there is a holistic engagement. The government of India actually brought out a national action plan. And this action plan brought out very clearly what the role of each agency was and how would we engage with national and international partners. In this endeavor, the Department of Biotechnology, and we have our own wholly owned company that's called Paratek, which has been set up a couple of years back to foster the innovation and startup ecosystem within the country. They have engaged extensively with the research community. We are also very pleased that many of our startups today are contributing to this global fight that we have. Despite this being a risky venture, we have startups like Bugworks, we have startups who are incubated in our incubator at CCAMP, which is also one of the CARBEX identified incubators and accelerators for AMR. We have IKP at Hyderabad, which has actually got into an Australia partnership for AMR. Very recently, Paratek had engaged with all our incubators and startups with the Department of Biotechnology, and we felt that now there is a need to have a completely dedicated AMR incubator. So we are already working in that direction, and we have an example from the environment and clean energy side. When in the clean energy sector, as a global challenge, we launched a 25-country mission innovation platform. India was the first country to set up a clean energy international incubator, which allows the movement of startups, gives them a soft landing here, gives exchange of startups between different countries, giving them access to market, giving them access to the knowledge, the technology. And we actually felt that AMR is definitely one such case that we should take it on. But I think what I would also like to suggest at this very point of time is that, like in other challenges that we have, AMR also, we should, in addition to all the existing platforms that we have a global platform which connects all researchers, startups, and industry, so that we could have a common theme towards which we are working. And this conference that you're doing today, what the Global AMR Hub does, what CARBEX does, is exactly in that very direction. It's also important to note that where are we today? And I think towards the end of my conversation now, I would just like to take us to where are we at COVID. We were struck with this unprecedented times, and none of us ever imagined that in our lifetime we would really face a pandemic. But what did COVID really teach us? It gave us the challenges, but then also put before us a lot of opportunities. What really were those opportunities? The opportunities were, how do we connect virtually? This whole platform that we're doing today is an example of that. Virtual connections enabled more conversations between groups who thought it may not be possible. They all came together to respond to that common objective which we're all fighting even today, is to how do we globally come together to bring in a vaccine which would be available globally. Global access mechanisms, global trial mechanisms, connecting global manufacturers with research groups in other countries, using trial sites across different countries. Why are we all doing that? Because globally, we feel that we need a vaccine very early. In the next 12 months is when we began COVID, and now we say in the next couple of months, can we have a vaccine which is going to be available to us? If that's the level, and the collaborations within our own country we saw, whether it was researchers from academia or startups or industry, all willingly came together to share their knowledge. Do we really need an AMR pandemic to drive us to this? No. I think we should learn from this and say, if we can do it for COVID, why not AMR? AMR is as big a challenge for us. We don't need to be always struck by a pandemic to take forward what are global challenges and come together as a community. I think it's important now that we already have, we've recognized what the issues with AMR are. And the government of India is committed, and across the globe, I know all countries have this level of commitment who've come together. I think it's important, commitments are there, but I think it's now important that we accelerate the progress of what we do in terms of our efforts in terms of AMR. And as I said very rightly, how do we collaborate for more action to take it ahead? But more importantly, I think what is important is that once we do this, there has to be some sustainable mechanism in how we take it ahead. Resources are key and critical, both human resource and financial resources. Post-COVID, we are all going to really face this, and we are already facing this financial crunch. How do we maximize and get the maximum potential of whatever our resources are through optimizing them through these collaborations? I think we are all on the right path. This pandemic should be an opportunity for us to take it ahead, and maybe this is really our last chance to come together and say, we're going to deliver as a globe. And India is committed, India is partnering with all agencies, and as I said, we look forward to many more collaborations to be able to deliver. And we are confident that our research community will be able to do it. So thank you very much, and we look forward to taking these collaborations ahead. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Dr. Renu, for this very insightful summary of the activities that are currently going on in India. And it's really great to see you and also India being represented here in this panel, because it is, as you said, so important as one of the learnings from the COVID pandemic that we really work together globally. Sorry, can you hear me? Can the panel hear me? I'm not sure where the technical problem is. I hope the panel can hear me.
I can hear you. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. So I was thanking you, Dr. Renu, for this insight into the activities in India, and I think it's great that we have this global perspective with you here. If you allow me one question, you gave very good insights into the biotech, the academic, all the research contribution that India is currently already giving and increasing. And we see already great companies that are, collaborating with all of us globally and within CARB-X, etc. But do you have already, or can you comment on potentially concrete plans how India would foresee participating in the economic incentives and potentially being part of creating a valid marketplace for novel antibiotics again? Is there anything going on in this regard?
So as I said, India is open to all levels of participation and collaboration. Our initial collaborations that we have done in terms of the research and innovation, but we are very open to considering any of, like we have done, and that's why I brought in the example of the COVID vaccine. For the COVID vaccine, wherever there was a requirement, India has clearly brought out the statement and said we would be partnering with all global manufacturers. We would be part of the global manufacturing ecosystem itself, understanding that we have strengths in this whole area. And I think the same holds true for AMR as well. We do understand and recognize the strengths that we have. And I think India's policy, which at many fora has been even highlighted by our Honorable Prime Minister, is whatever we do, it's not just for India, it's for India and the globe. So I think that's our policy and philosophy, and we would be very pleased to have any of these discussions as we move on.
Thank you very much. And it's really great to hear that this support is here, and that, you know, maybe these very few positive things that the COVID pandemic brought up on us, as you said, is the global collaboration and the understanding that we need to work together to solve these problems, and in the end realize that prevention is significantly cheaper than reaction. I don't know how we are on time. Do we have some questions still from the panel towards Dr. Renu? Because I remind everyone that she needs to leave at 2 p.m. on the dot. I see that now there's an echo, yeah, but there seems to be no questions yet. So, Dr. Renu, I thank you again for your participation in the panel, and wish you a very nice rest of the day. And if there will be questions coming up forward during the panel or something, I'm sure we can exchange and potentially have your comments later. Thank you very much.
Absolutely, it will be a pleasure to respond to them, and thank you, and extremely sorry and apologies for leaving, but I wish you and the panel good luck into the remaining part. Thank you so much.
Thank you. So with this, it's my pleasure to introduce our next speaker on the panel, which is Catharina Boehme, CEO of FIND. It's actually great to have her here as well, because she will shed some light on the diagnostic area, and especially the learnings that we had now from this current COVID situation, and that can hopefully be translated into the AMR space. So thank you very much, and the floor is yours, Catharina.
Thank you very much, Marc. And I think my presentation builds nicely on what you've already heard from Dr. Swarup. If I could have my next slide. So if I, if I look at the COVID-19 and AMR situation, I'll speak to you today from two perspectives and wearing two hats. First of all, as the CEO of FIND, passionate about holding the spread of AMR by driving access to diagnostics for low and middle income countries and improving the diagnostic pathways for patients, but also as a co-convener of the Access to COVID-19 Tools Accelerator. And so, I think it's important here to highlight that COVID-19, within a very short time, has catalyzed actions and brought topics together in an integrated way forward that, were identified 5 years ago as the critical needs to combat antimicrobial resistance, from, surveillance, public awareness, sanitation and hygiene, RDTs, rapid diagnostic tests, all the way through to forming an international coalition for action. And this is just a reminder of the review on antimicrobial resistance. As an ACT Accelerator partnership, we aim, to have a real end-to-end approach across commodities and sectors, and we've brought a lot of players in to make progress together. And we have been able to make unprecedented progress within a very short time. So just to give you one example, we aim as a partnership to make sure that all countries are able to deploy affordable, quality point of care tests. And one of our goals is also to disrupt and minimize the disruption of core health services. When we look at the R&D for diagnostics in the COVID-19 space, we've had the first diagnostics out within a month from when we saw, that the disease spread. Within, just 2 months, by end of April, actually, we had the first point of care molecular test out and regulatory approved. And now there's more than 1,200 tests in the COVID-19 diagnostics pipeline, including many rapid diagnostic tests. And we're actually, as we speak, starting to roll out antigen-based rapid diagnostic tests to low middle income countries. So, so what does it take, and what are the lessons learned that we may be able to apply for AMR, a hidden pandemic? Because when we compare that on the R&D side, for example, it took us 5 years to come up with the first integrated molecular diagnostic tool. And that's true not only for tuberculosis, for many other pathogens, we don't have the diagnostics we need to fight AMR. I guess the first lesson learned has been discussed already quite a lot in this conference. I'll be short. It's very clear that antibiotic stewardship and pandemic response are not mutually exclusive, quite in the contrary, and that that not every COVID-19 patient, and certainly not every patient suspected of COVID-19, needs antibiotics. We rely on clinical competence, we rely on existing health services, and we have to make sure that patients receive testing beyond just COVID-19 to be able to take appropriate decisions with regard to their best management and treatment. And it's also important in this context that AMR and COVID-19 have a very common R&D agenda on the diagnostic side. For both, we need differential diagnosis, which means we need to look at dual testing of influenza and COVID-19, but beyond that, we need diagnostics that we don't have, for example, for a number of zoonotic diseases. We need the game changer in terms of a bacterial versus viral rapid test, etc., and so forth. Lesson number 2, collaboration can be transformative. And so clearly what we see a big difference between COVID-19 and AMR is that we've been able in COVID-19 to involve all global health stakeholder groups, including industry, but also civil society. And this mobilization created a movement, basically, that allows us to make the progress we've made. And so let me just give you some concrete examples. Marc, you talked about pooled procurement and pull mechanisms at the outset. Clearly for COVID-19, it was possible to build on, existing pull mechanisms through the Global Fund, through Gavi, that allowed us to very rapidly take everything that's coming out of the R&D pipeline and enable scale up in low middle income countries, actually at a pace that was never seen before. Data sharing, right? When you look at sequencing databases now holding more than 80,000 sequences, in our case, multiple governments, multiple institutions, multiple labs willing to share evaluation study data for their diagnostic tests. It's been an unprecedented effort and event in terms of data sharing. And then, last not least, risk sharing models such as the COVAX facility that hopefully will be broadened out to more than just vaccines at a later stage. The third lesson, right? I think there has been no precedent in terms of building access as much into already the R&D agreements and R&D pipeline. Clear lessons here for COVID-19. Funding must be readily accessible. Establish pooled R&D funds with access conditions built in from the start have provided a lot of value here. See, for example, CEPI. And then, definitely what we see in the diagnostic space, but beyond that also for other commodities, there is much more upfront commitment, both from the developers, but also from the funders in terms of IP and data sharing, tech transfer agreements, and global access terms with regard to affordability, availability. So we really see significant differences there. And I think at the conference, others have already highlighted, the big shift here. So for example, we have a call for proposals out and are finalizing the awards. So in that call for proposal, we see amongst 70 applicants, 15 of the antigen RDT producers are actually ready for tech transfer to low middle income countries to ensure access for vulnerable populations without any further negotiations, which is sort of something we've not seen before in the diagnostic field. And we see innovative models in terms of social venture, spin-out, companies working in partnership with institutions in low middle income countries to drive local production, etc. Lesson learned number 4. I think the supply chain war across commodities, but in our case on the diagnostic side, has shocked all of us, with countries generally losing out when they didn't have any local manufacturing units or purchasing power. So how can we prevent to make that happen again in other situations, and what can we learn? Clearly we've seen innovative licensing agreements that were able to facilitate manufacturing scale up on manufacturing terms across regions. And I think we should work towards fixing supply chains so that new commodities for AMR can get where they're needed for greatest impact, and of course also without delay. Lesson learned number 5 for COVID-19, political will drives rapid implementation of new innovations. And that's something, as you know, we've all struggled with on the diagnostic side for antimicrobial resistance. Clearly in COVID-19, countries were there from day one. We've seen, with the Africa Union, Africa CDC, early on here on the right side shown the first laboratory training in Senegal, early February 2020. We've seen a dramatic step up in response and also in sort of the creation of creative mechanisms to address this pandemic. When you look, for example, at the PACT initiative and the marketplace that has been set up for Africa. However, we also, of course, have seen through that lens the dramatic limitations in terms of infrastructure that is needed to be successful going forward. Testing rates, for example, in Africa for COVID-19 remain dramatically low. Testing scale up so far was by and large possible through TB, HIV, and malaria services. And that emphasized an important lesson learned also for AMR, the meaning and importance of cross-cutting support for health system strengthening and for integrated patient management. Lesson learned number 6, COVID-19 really provides the investment case for global health security. When you look back at the numbers for antimicrobial resistance, in terms of the modeling, with $100 trillion lost or to be lost in global production by 2050, and a need for investment, 40 billion over 10 years. When you now look at the COVID-19 numbers, all of a sudden that doesn't seem so unreal anymore in terms of an actual number, with 10 trillion in stimulus by governments already spent by end of July, and just 7.7 billion of public investment in R&D over 4 months. And that's not counting any private sector investment, which at least would double this number. And I wanted to say also, right, that this has been paired also with significant spend and step up on the procurement side, especially for low-income countries. The development banks, Global Fund, all international mechanisms are ramping up their support. And I don't want to say that fundraising for COVID-19 has been easy, but I think it's shown how also players worked together in mobilizing funding. And then, last not least, I don't want to end on the money, but on patients, right? So bringing it back to the patient care cascades. I think the hope can be that COVID-19 acts as a catalyst for actually helping to provide patients with an essential package of care in the interest of health security, but also in the interest of patient safety and good patient care. We've advocated for a long time for the strengthening of surveillance systems. I think there is a lot of dual opportunity here for AMR and COVID-19, or more broadly, zoonotic diseases. The essential diagnostic list, we're really still in the infancy of rolling that out. But I think it's now become much more visible how important it is to screen and test for fever, for febrile diseases, for example. So just to close by saying, let's work towards an integrated approach that enables us to detect outbreaks early, to respond to pandemics, but in the same time, let's not neglect AMR and build in what we can do as we move along already now. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Catharina. I think this was a really nice insight of what has been the response that is unprecedented, I think, on COVID in terms of speed of actions, international collaboration, but also money deployed. If you allow me one quick follow-on question, I mean, how do you feel when you see this situation and that it always needs first a catastrophic event for us as humanity to act? And do you have any comment or idea how we can engage governments to actually act before the catastrophic event is there? And this is saying in brackets that we already have 750,000 casualties each year on the patient perspective due to AMR, which is currently still more than COVID has caused. So do you have any comment on that?
Of course, absolutely. That's why I call it the hidden pandemic, right? I'm passionate about tuberculosis, which is the leading cause of that list right now in AMR. And so we've been asking ourselves the same question. I think there have been many people, including also, of course, the World Health Organization, the Global Pandemic Monitoring Board, advocating for pandemic preparedness rather than response. And I think the jury is still out whether we will all together learn our lesson this time. But I think the economic effects have this time been so drastic that there will be changes in the ecosystem. I think we'll next hear from Dame Sally, who also, I think, is trying to address that problem and looking at how we can drive an economic ecosystem shift through the lens of COVID. And, I'm looking forward to also hear her thoughts on that.
Thank you, Catharina, and perfect transition. It is now my pleasure to obviously introduce Dame Sally Davies. It's a great honor to have you on this panel speaking to us. Dame Sally Davies, as probably every one of you knows, is the UK Special Envoy on Antimicrobial Resistance and former Chief Medical Officer of England. And he has been instrumental in helping the AMR field to actually make all the progress we have made already in the last years. So thank you very much. And very much looking forward to hear your comments on how the future looks with and after the COVID-19 pandemic for AMR.
Thank you, Marc. What an honor to be here in this closing session. And thank you to Biocom and the Boehme Alliance for bringing us together from all over the world. We've had inspiring speakers all across the meeting for the last 5 years. And I have to say, I'm always in awe of Dr. Swarup. And I think, Catharina, you're up there in just showing us where we should go. And we've got to tackle, we know we've got to act about AMR. So let's think about it. I want to pick up where Catharina was and Renu finished on COVID-19. Here we are with this respiratory infection, a massive global health security threat, which is so sad in the way it has claimed lives across the world. And every one of us has been touched by it. It has stopped the world in its tracks. And that's why we're in 2D. We're not in 3D together. Yesterday, to this conference, I compared COVID-19 to a lobster. I gather it led to 2 hashtags, one, rescue the lobster, and the other, we are the lobster. But let me tell you what I said. I think COVID-19 is like the lobster dropped into boiling water, and it's immediate and disruption and death. Whereas AMR is the lobster put into cold water and slowly heated up to die. That disruption simmers for a long time. The effect is just as tragic, and the disruption is going to be even worse. We risk losing, as others have said, modern medicine. And I absolutely agree. If we take one thing from this crisis is preparedness matters, but actually reaction and sorting it out and health prevention are crucial. And this is where we all come in. This global response to COVID is clearly the way we from Britain have been advocating we should go for AMR. And the ACT accelerator that Catharina is playing such an important role in with vaccines, therapeutics and diagnostics shows that no country has got the key. We're contributing from Britain to COVID-19 from our life sciences sector, global response events, and actually we were very proud to host the replenishing of Gavi, the vaccine allowance, so they can provide the life-saving vaccines for COVID and other routine diseases in our poorest countries. But now we've got to get it to work for AMR at the same scale. You know, I think in Britain we are a global leader, but what's the point of being a global leader if everyone else is left behind? I want us all, the poor as well as the rich, to arrive at the finishing line together. We've got to, as an international community, work together on tackling this. It's not just the World Health Organization. This is One Health. We need Food and Agriculture Organization, the Organization for Animal Health, OIE, and the UN Interagency Coordination Group, which I co-convened, gave our report, which brought together many international organizations with technical experts last year to the UN Secretary General, saying what actions needed taking. I think if I got a rerun, now we've had COVID, I'd ask for even more. But our recommendations were aiming at facilitating the delivery of the UN's 2030 SDGs, and we urged for action now. So between us, we've got to push the UN system, the tripartite, and other countries across the world to implement the recommendations. And particularly in this conference, we're looking at innovation and collaboration. You've heard over the week about new kinds of incentives for antibiotic development to meet our ultimate aim of new clinical products coming through the regulatory approval. And I'm very proud that it was only a year ago that we became, in the UK, the first country to announce we'd test innovative models, pull models, that pay companies for antimicrobials based on their value to society, on a health technology assessment of their value in the NHS as opposed to the volumes used. We know that doesn't work. I'm proud to say that in June of this year, we launched this world first experiment to pay for antibiotics by a subscription rather than per pill method. And I gather it's caught the nickname of the Netflix model. If that makes people understand and follow or try something different and maybe better, then wonderful. We know it's going to empower the NHS to follow appropriate stewardship of new antimicrobials while giving a reasonable return on investment for the company and effective incentives for global investment to develop highly effective antimicrobials. Terribly important. How on earth can some companies free ride on others and expect to make their profits just out of anti-cancer drugs, for instance? We all need to be working at this. But we've got to start valuing our antimicrobials, as we know, as global public goods for everyone and by everyone. The One Health approach to addressing this, as I've mentioned before, and we need unprecedented cooperation across sectors and countries, just as we're seeing in COVID. And that future that we've got to shape has to be driven by the One Health approach, because effective antibiotics underpin our food chain, agriculture, water systems. And we know that this matters to investors and consumers alike, and it matters for our planet as well. Our post-COVID roadmap has got to integrate AMR so we can strengthen supply chains and biosecurity. And I think Catharina laid that out very clearly. We've got to build back better. And I think across the world, we've got to start to view global health much more holistically, seeing it as an economic rather than just an environmental issue. I loved the idea of India of setting up an AMR specific incubator, but I also want other countries to follow the Indian example, because their government has introduced draft legislation to limit antibiotic waste that pollutes our environment. As a leading antibiotic producer, India's new production regulations could really limit the creation of antimicrobial resistant bacteria. Wouldn't it be great if other countries followed suit? We all need everyone to reduce antibiotic production and escape into the environment. We in the UK have got a 20-year vision for AMR, so that by 2040, we want to be living in a world where AMR is contained, controlled, and mitigated. It's an ambition not just for minimizing infections and providing safe care, but a desire for international collaboration across public and private sectors in Britain and across the whole community internationally. We want to continue to be good global partners, from supporting effective behavior change to increasing understanding of how trade, environment, supply and demand have impacts on not only ourselves, but countries across the world. We want to be winners with the rest of the world at the finishing line at the same time, as I said before. If our destination is a world in which we work with industry to promote innovation investment models to deliver a sustainable supply of new high quality treatments and diagnostics, then our 5-year national action plan is our own UK map for how to get there. We've got targets in this action plan to invest in innovation, supply, access, and commitments to invest in research, including SMEs through UK research and innovation and other agencies. So the next few years are going to be crucial for investment and incentivization, both for us in the UK and across the world. And I welcome the work that the European Commission is doing in this area. Of course, our future needs what we are calling a triple jump: awareness, conservation, and innovation. We need better understanding by all in society about how AMR spreads. measures to promote stewardship of antimicrobials, and we should be clear that conservation means ensuring that antibiotics are used when they will be effective, and that's complementary to ensuring access for the developing countries across the globe who currently don't have enough antibiotics. But our third bit is innovation, harnessing technology, investing in R&D, generating data, and in real time enabling doctors to spot the infection that patients are suffering from and which antimicrobials will be the most effective. After all, penicillin was a groundbreaking technology in its time, discovered in Britain, developed in the United States. We've got to continue researching and supporting innovators and our life science industries. Science will be instrumental in highlighting the problems of AMR and for making the solutions. And we'll have to communicate this in order to sustain momentum, drive success, and do it together. We all know that the World Economic Forum identified antibiotic resistance as a global risk beyond the capacity of any of us as organizations or nations to manage or mitigate alone. That's the great reality we all here accept. It's the reality of COVID. How can we use the business case of COVID and the momentum of COVID to keep moving forward on this? And there, the WEF Great Reset Initiative in January 2021 provides a window of opportunity to shape our recovery in the post-COVID world. So we, whether we're individuals, washing our hands, governments, investors, consumers, businesses, need to be big, brave, and bold, because the way forward, the way for the world, will depend on our actions and, above all, on collaboration. So I welcome what has gone before in this conference, because it all points to innovation and collaboration. We can do this, but by golly, we're going to need more money and more energy. Let's go do it. Thank you.
Dame Sally Davies for this extremely inspiring talk on the field and on the way forward. I think we couldn't agree more. We need to be bold and move forward in collaboration. And I do actually really like that lobster image. So thank you very much for that. In the interest of time, I will move on now to our next speaker, and then save the questions for the end when the entire panel is together. Our next speaker is Tiemo Woelken. He is member of the European Parliament from Germany. Then he is vice chair of the European Parliament Interest Group on AMR. And it is really a great honor to have you here. And thank you very much for taking the time and speaking to us, because it's a crucial moment probably to shape and hopefully fix for good in a sustainable manner the AMR sector. Thank you, Tiemo.
Yeah, hello. First of all, I would like to switch off my speaker so that I don't have an echo. Sorry. So, first of all, I would like to thank you for inviting me to be here today to give some insights into our work in the European Parliament Interest Group on AMR. We are living in strange times. The COVID-19 pandemic has turned our world upside down. Things we thought normal doing, such as going out for dinner with friends and family, visiting concerts or sport events, or even commuting to the office with public transport, have turned into possible risks, as one could catch the infection. The world is struggling to get this pandemic in control, and for now there is still no real end in sight. COVID-19 has put our healthcare systems under extreme pressure, but this could only be the foretaste of what we could expect from a world where antimicrobials are no longer effective. Superbugs resistant to antibiotics not only threaten lives, they undermine every aspect of modern medicine. This is why we need to act now to safeguard the scientific achievements of the last century. Like COVID-19, AMR represents a serious cross-border health threat. AMR is even among the WHO list of 10 threats to global health and could even cause the death of 10 million people annually by 2050. And in comparison with COVID-19, however, there's something we can do to prevent these deaths. This is the main difference. We know that AMR is there and we know that we need to act. Still, too many people are not aware of this issue. The awareness of the relationship between the use of antimicrobials and the development and spread of AMR is still low. Among other things, we need to stop the misuse and overuse of antibiotics, offer alternative treatments and stewardship for healthcare professionals. Moreover, monitoring and surveillance needs to be strengthened, as well as infection prevention and control, and focus should also be put on better access to rapid, affordable diagnostic tools, also mentioned by Catharina. Let us face it, AMR-related challenges will only increase in the years ahead, and effective action is reliant on continued cross-sectoral investments in public and private sectors, public and private research and innovation, so that better tools, products, and devices, as well as new treatments and alternative approaches, can be developed. With antibiotics, however, we face an industry dilemma. On the one hand, we need industry to invest in research and development in order to get new antibiotics, and this is a very cost-intensive process. And on the other hand, we need these antibiotics to be used as little as possible in order to have them, meaning that there will not be any real profit. The balance between costs and profits is the biggest barrier for new drugs to be developed. Still, the industry made a first step in regards to much needed funding and started the AMR Action Fund. However, this will not be enough. Policymakers need to put legislation on the table and make sure that there is also more public funding to tackle AMR. And with AMR, we need team play between the industry and governments. And this is the reason the EU, and here especially the European Commission, has to finally put on the table to tackle legislation on the table to tackle AMR. We need a reinforcement of the One Health approach across the Union, which connects human health, animal health, and environmental protection. And moreover, we need better push and pull incentives and secure funding, as Mr. Gitzinger was stating at the beginning, for companies, especially small and medium enterprises that develop new antibiotics. Unfortunately, there is not a one approach fits all, which is why we need to support the development of needs-driven models to fix the antibiotic development pipeline. At the same time, we need to ensure both prudent use of new drugs as well as affordable access for everyone. Quite the challenge. The Commission should look into delinking the price and volume of antibiotic sales from R&I cost or through alternative mechanisms. Moreover, the Commission should take an end-to-end approach which targets public investment across the entire chain, from global priority setting to early discovery through the product development phase to appropriate and affordable patient access. There is the need for decent incentives for the industry in order for them to take the risk in research and development for new drugs to tackle AMR. For this, the Commission has to look into different push and pull incentives. And I have to say now is the best time for the Commission to do so, as we are all awaiting the upcoming pharmaceutical strategy. This is an opportunity for the European Union to finally put something on the table. And together with other MEPs in the interest group on AMR, we want to ensure that AMR is high on the EU policy agenda and that the European Parliament plays a key role in boosting AMR action. And we in our intergroup have identified 8 objectives we want to follow throughout this mandate. The first one is clearly to raise awareness on AMR. The second one is to support the use of targeted setting and evaluation in policymaking. We want to promote funding and AMR-related investments. We want to enable an inclusive EU AMR One Health dialogue. We want to ensure that prevention is at the heart of all AMR action. We want to address the market failures in antibiotic research and innovation. We want to fight pharmaceutical pollution. And lastly, we want to ensure effective implementation of EU veterinary medical products and medicated feed regulations. And I now would also like to take the opportunity to thank our Secretariat of the Interest Group that is co-hosted by the European Public Health Alliance and Healthcare Without Harm Europe, who are helping us with our work. Lastly, I'm very well aware that the problem of AMR cannot be tackled within the European Union alone, but that it needs global action. Nonetheless, binding legislation within the European Union would be a first and, in my opinion, long overdue step we need to take. And as Marc was correctly saying, the German presidency has taken over a couple of weeks ago, and I did already take the opportunity to push AMR to be on the top of the agenda during meetings I had with the presidency. And I think we all can agree, using Dame Sally Davies' example, that unlike COVID, we have to already act now and not wait until the lobster is slowly boiled. So with this, I'm looking forward to the discussion. Thank you very much.
Much, Tiemo, Woelken, for these actually very inspiring and good news words that you forwarded here to us from the European Parliament and the actions going on in the European Commission. We're very much looking forward to see these 8 points that you mentioned really coming into action on a European level. It's really great news. Again, before we open up later on the panel, we have one last speaker, which is my colleague Evan Lowe, CEO of Paratek and the chair of the Antimicrobials Working Group. So I dare to say the US counterpart of the Boehme Alliance, unifying the small and medium-sized enterprises in the US, also dedicated on working in antimicrobials. Evan, thank you very much, and the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you, Marc, very much, and hello, everyone. And I want to thank the organizers as well as Biocom and the Boehme Alliance for inviting me to join this closing panel and to be the last discussant, actually, on this very urgent issue of AMR. And I think it's critical that we continue to be advocates and, as Dame Sally Davies said, be brave and be bold with regards to continuing to spotlight the importance of what we are talking about. And it's very exciting to see, I think, the positive outcomes and the progress that's been made over this week-long platform, and I want to congratulate everyone involved. What I'd like to do today, without slides, is to give you a quick overview of Paratek, the Antimicrobials Working Group, as well as what's going on in the US, and maybe there are some learnings there that could potentially be considered, because I do like and really applaud, I think, the holistic approach that was just articulated by Tiemo, because it is a holistic approach. That all being said, I think that there are issues with regards to the current antimicrobial marketplace, independent of just even thoughts about sponsoring more dollars for research and development, that are, if we don't act now, even today, that this fragile and failing marketplace will continue to fail. And as noted in the Boehme Alliance letter, not only will Europe not have access to novel, innovative antibiotics, but the globe will fail to have that. Because as you may or may not know, if you look at the innovation today that's being taken care of, 95% of the antibiotic innovation and our research and development is being conducted by companies like Paratek, small single product companies that are trying to get to the quote-unquote finish line with regards to approval. But at the end of the day, the approval is just the beginning of trying to remain viable, so that if we are commercially successful at the end of the day, we can actually have this product on, on the marketplace for patients for decades, which we know these antibiotics are life-saving therapies. You can't forget about that. That is a big deal. And I think that, in the absence of having a viable marketplace, we've already been able to see that there have been companies like Melinta, Achaogen, which was already mentioned, as well as Tetraphase, that have been in dire straits and/or declared bankruptcy, and their products are marginally going to be available first in the U.S., but for sure not available in the European theater. Paratek is a small biotech company. We have about 100 employees. Our operations are based in Boston, Massachusetts, and Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And our main product is a modernized tetracycline called Nuzyra that's was improved at the end of 2018 by FDA for community-acquired bacterial pneumonia and serious skin infections, and including AMR infections. And we launched it early in 2019 in the US. I think what Marc and the others realized today that for us, based upon our resources, as well as I think in some ways the antiquated approach that the regulatory science field has taken in the European Union, there's no near-term plan for us to register or launch our product in Europe. And today, many companies are exiting or have failed. And I think it is, I think just to put my view into the room as well, I don't think we should ever stop and believe that we actually have invested enough in terms of the push space. We always have to stay in front of the innovation curve, because as I always say, bugs always win, and we have to stay ahead of that innovation curve. But I think what we're really talking about here, in terms of what I'd like to be able to leave folks thinking about, is what about that pull commercialization space? Because without it, and if there's no certainty with regards to what that pull commercialization environment looks like, we won't be able to ever have investors come into this marketplace. They've told us in the US, and they'll tell any European company or any company anywhere, that they'll stay on the sidelines if there's not a clear pathway with regards to a commercial model. In the US today, we have an antiquated, outdated reimbursement system through the DRG system that was put in place 30 to 40 years ago. It worked at that time, but today, with the bundled payment of antibiotics in the context of the total bundle payment for the care of someone with a serious hospitalized infection, the cost of antibiotics is being looked at as a deterrent, a disincentive for hospitals to choose the use of innovative antibiotics. And as such, our belief today is that antibiotics, because they are being used in the context of hospitals that are running very, very small marginal business, and I think the COVID pandemic has made that even worse, that they are choosing on an administrative basis to prioritize on their formularies antibiotics based upon cost, not because of the life-saving value that they offer for patients. And to me, that's unconscionable. As a physician that had been at the bedside for more than 2 decades, that would be the decision algorithm, not what's best for my patient, but what's best for the pocketbooks of our hospitals. And so I think that, in the US today, one of the first and I think more near-term changes that could occur is in an act that you may have heard about, a legislative act that you may have heard about from Kevin Otterson earlier in this conference, the DISARM Act, which is developing a separate payment system for antibiotics. So in fact, price can be taken out of it, and there could be recognition of value, and that this would be something that could be very, very good, I think, for our overall US-based marketplace. And that basically allows for the choice of the right antibiotic for the right patient at the right time, and taking the cost and price out of that. And we think that if there's another COVID stimulus bill, that there might be an opportunity to put that in there. We've been pushing hard from a legislative standpoint. The Antimicrobials Working Group is a coalition of 13 small biotech companies that are all pushing and doing work to educate lobbyists to educate staffers and legislators, both on the Senate and the Republican side, in order to push this legislation forward. And there are other considerations that are being looked at, like the Pasteur Act, which is a subscription model. You've heard about that also from Kevin Otterson, as well as, I think, major reforms that are under the authority of CMS and HHS in the US to be able to actually create a payment system that recognizes innovation. Because at the end of the day, for us as small biotech companies, we are not obligated to sell our product at a loss. That's just not a business model that makes sense in any setting, and it's not a model that will ultimately be sustainable. And this innovation that has received a lot of push funding will go away, because I think, as Kevin Otterson has said, these products can get pushed into a parking lot of phase 1 or phase 2 with nobody to pick them up and to develop them through commercialization. And I think priority review vouchers is another way that we've thought about, trying to help these innovative biotech companies to have a little bit of value at the back end, to be able to monetize some of their innovation, to create some capital for them, to bridge them to profitability, so that they can have a sustainable life. And I think that's all I think part and parcel to where I want to go when I think about the European opportunity here. And I think it's an opportunity for the globe as well. I think it's absolutely appropriate from an antibiotic stewardship standpoint, as Tiemo said, to limit and to be very thoughtful about the use of antibiotics to preserve their efficacy for as long as possible. Well, if that's the approach and we all stand by it as a globe, we should actually then recognize it and say, look, this is going to be something akin to an orphan disease, orphan drug model. And therefore, reimbursement, the regulatory science, and pricing should all, I think, reflect those potential opportunities. So I think that there needs to be, I think, advances and an uptick in the regulatory science in the EMA to think about how can we actually think about these antibiotics, because when they initially launched, they're used in tiny, tiny numbers of patients. There is virtually no risk of a massive utilization through that mechanism, and so therefore there can be safety surveillance mechanisms set up in the typical way that orphan diseases are looked at as well. I think there should be pricing reform. We should think about pricing reform across the EU as well. There's still a requirement for us as a small company to come into Europe once we have the approval and to go country by country to get our pricing established on a country by country basis. This can't be something that's solved on a country by country basis. We've seen how the attempts in the U.S. to address COVID has been taken on a state by state basis, and with that kind of I think approach, it takes time. There are inconsistencies, and for us as a small biotech company with limited resources, we wouldn't have all of our European member states with an acceptable price negotiated probably for 2 to 3 years. At that point in time, as you've seen for many of these biotech companies that have gotten a US approval for a product, Achaogen went bankrupt 9 months after they launched their product in the US. So there's no pathway that makes sense if we continue to have this kind of country by country pricing. And I think the final thing that I'll mention, something unique that Paratek was a recipient of, is a very unique private-public partnership with BARDA to further the R&D pathway for our product to develop it for bioterrorism organisms. But there was also not only an investment to create a US-based onshoring pathway for Nuzyra that we're very excited about. There was also actually a commitment to actually procure Nuzyra for the strategic national stockpile. And I think that when you think about pandemic preparedness and how woefully underprepared we are as a globe for COVID, I think that should be a humbling moment for us to think about what should we do from a global preparedness standpoint to take on pandemic preparedness. And there are models that we should consider to think about whether the European Union could come up with a pandemic stockpiling approach that would allow there to be stockpiling of a novel antibiotic for a period of 2 to 3 years. I mean, I think most products, if they're good and they have innovative components and they address massive resistance needs here, that in 2 to 3 years, that period of time, a company should be able to actually move to profitability. And that's a bridge to get there. But I think there's a way that stockpiling could also be utilized as a way to provide non-dilutive funding for small biotech companies as part of a public-private partnership. And over time, guess what? If there's a pandemic that occurs on a specific resistant pathogen beyond what we're already experiencing for many pathogens, that there will be these antibiotics in the stockpile. Just as a parenthetical, it took us, our particular product, we actually synthesized it in July of 1996. We didn't get approved by the FDA until October of 2018. Antibiotics don't just appear. They don't just have the ability to be ready tomorrow if a pandemic appears. We need to be prepared. And what I would put forth, and Marc asked us to think about these kind of solutions, what should we do in a very concrete way today to think about supporting the antibiotic marketplace, because these are life-saving antibiotics, and these are products that we know are important for global health. And so with that, I'll stop there, Marc, and maybe we can get to some questions. Thank you all very much.
Thank you very much, Evan. And I think it is very clear that on both sides of the Atlantic, we face the same issues. And this is true on a global perspective. So I think the message is loud and clear that we need change, and we need change. While I agree with you, never stop on the innovation side and being ahead of the innovation curve, as you say. But the most urgent change that we now need, in my view, still is, as you also echoed, the pull mechanism, or fixing the marketplace. I would like to ask now all the panelists to go on, at least with the video, if that's possible. If we experience echoes, then please just mute your microphone until you're on to speak. Just checking so far, we start to get first questions in the chat. This is good. Maybe if you allow me to start with two quick questions to Dame Sally Davies. I think, you know, the NHS is now really the first kind of subscription model that has gone live. Sweden, or at least for only innovative products. I think Sweden, as we just saw in the chat as well, has announced now on its model the first candidates. But my question is here, how can we make these role models appealing to a broader political audience to take action? I think this is number one. And number two, how can we actually start to communicate better that fixing the economics around AMR is not an unnecessary subsidy for the pharmaceutical industry, but that it's actually a necessity to secure our modern healthcare system? Because I often still feel that a lot of the political stakeholders just think it's the wrong thing to subsidize pharma, and we really do not believe that this is the case here.
No, well, I would agree with you. We're not trying to subsidize pharma. We want you to produce, in addition to these miracle drugs and interventions that you produce, a new set of antibiotics and antimicrobials. I want you to cure TB, malaria, all these things. And so you have to go on making the case. I think the fact that others like me, who are apolitical and public sector, make the case is very important. But the reason that I asked our Prime Minister to get Jim O'Neill to do that report was because the economic case is so terribly strong. And I think that's how we're going to need to go forward. It's both using the momentum of COVID, but the business case of COVID, and that kind of, you may come up with a better metaphor, but the metaphor of the lobster, that if we don't do it, we are going to be in trouble. And this is about partnership with pharma. That's why I think the AMR Action Fund is a great start, but we also have to play our part. How on earth can we expect a system, a private sector system that we have set up as a society to make a profit, to make drugs at a loss until modern medicine is lost, and then it'll be too late. So we have to keep going. And that's why I congratulate Tiemo, on all the work he's doing and the European Commission, because I think Europe has led on a lot of this. And I really pray you will go on leading on this and get a really good pharmaceutical program going forwards that will begin to address this and show the rest of the world how we need to do it.
Thank you. Okay, there's a very long question that came in. I have to read that first. In the meantime, we had a first question that was, maybe Catharina can answer this one. How can we go about stewardship with new antibiotics so that we don't run immediately into the next problem? I think this is obviously for you also is related to diagnostics. and sustainable use?
Yeah, I can start by answering, but I think, you know, even more powerful would be an answer from the therapeutic side. Clearly, of course, from the diagnostic perspective, it would be most desirable to already write in the package inserts about the use of companion diagnostics in country regulations, make sure that diagnostics are prescribed only when a diagnosis has been established. You know, with GARD-P, for example, on sexually transmitted infections, gonorrhea, we have discussed quite a bit about how we could move there to the next step, but I think it would be important to give the word here more to the pharma side, because ultimately, of course, that will limit even further the economic case.
Sorry, Dame Sally Davies has.
Well, I was going to add that I think we have to bring in the public here, the patients. We have seen in Britain that patients ask for antibiotics and they think that they get better with them. So we have to do perpetual education directly face-to-face as clinicians with patients, but through the media and other ways, that they need to listen to their clinicians, doctors, nurses, pharmacists, that if it's a virus, it won't respond to an antibiotic. We know from studies that 1 in 4 to 1 in 3 prescriptions in our community are probably not needed. So I'm dying for really effective point of care, affordable diagnostics, but actually the understanding of the need to conserve antibiotics and when they work is terribly important. And there are, of course, tricks like delayed prescriptions and things like that that can work.
If I may add, I think that obviously from the industry perspective, the most effective ways to fix our economics around this is really to have a de-link model, because there shouldn't really be an incentive to push for volume to value these drugs. So I just see that Evan has lost us. Maybe the technical support can help him to come back in. In the meantime, there was a question for Tiemo Woelken, echoing a little bit also mine. It is all about how realistic is it that we can actually, in this pharmaceutical strategy that is upcoming in the European Union, get unity around the members of the parliament, of the member states, etc., to push for such a pull mechanism? And is there already enough support? Does the sense of urgency really, is it really there in the members of parliament? What is your impression?
First of all, let me just quickly respond to the stewardship thing. I think that Sally Davies is exactly right. More patients go on Google and think they know what they know what they need, so they don't trust their doctors anymore, and this is really a problem. But well, I do not think that MEPs are the problem. And if we want to change something, we always hear member states that call for subsidiarity and say it is not a European topic. And with AMR, however, we obviously have cross-border health threats, and this needs to be tackled on EU and furthermore global level. And I already heard rumors that the Commission is working on something in regards to incentivize the production of antibiotics or development of antibiotics. So I am hopeful that this will indeed be on the table soon. And again, the Parliament will, I don't think that my colleagues will be the problem, but the problem might be that member states insist on subsidiarity and the question of financing. So here we all need to push together.
Thank you, Tiemo. Can you maybe say something about how we as industry alliances can support you also in this? What is the right forum maybe?
Well, first of all, when it comes to the member states, it's obviously always helpful to talk to the governments in the member states. But I think we also need a push within the European Commission to really put something valuable on the table. And of course, it's always good to to create publicity and to advocate for this topic loudly.
Thank you. We have a question to Evan from Jonathan, which is touching upon the size of an effective pull mechanism. I think this has been largely discussed, but what is your impression? What would really help to bring in the private sector again in co-investing into AMR drug development? Because I believe that obviously the private sector will be so crucial to get back into this environment.
Yeah, I think, Marc, thank you for the question. I think that, when you think about this kind of setting, first, I think it's important for us on a lexicon basis to not really talk about this as something for pharma. These are really small biotech companies like ours. Pharma has largely exited the development, research, and commercialization space. And I think for us, as we think about bridging to profitability, that's really what we want to do as a biotech company, is to stand on our own 2 feet. And as I talked about, I think there's a 2 to 3 to 4 year window to get us to bridge there. And on some level, I think people have talked about $1 billion US, $3 to $3 billion US. I think in some level, those dollar values are in some ways not accessible in terms of the normal way people think about it. And I go back to Tiemo in terms of where, the European parliamentary view could be here. But I think if you could bridge, somewhere in the $250 to $500 million range to get us through the first 2 to 3 years of a launch that would include Europe as well, to bring Europe into frame as well, then I think that, you could get through a lot of the pricing and access issues that I think are daunting, and that goes along with the education of why a new antibiotic is important, but also how to use it in the context of appropriate stewardship.
Thank you. I have to admit that I would rather go back and aim for the 1 to 3 billion entry, not because of greediness, but rather because of the fact that if we go on the just kind of bridging pull mechanism or reward, what we will have is that the entire innovation system needs to be continuously supported by very significant push funding, which in the end will be, in my view, more expensive than having an adequate pull mechanism that helps to bring in the private sector and take on some of this risk of the failure in development, etc. So, but that's my view. I think we had another question here from John Rex, and I guess this is probably again a bit directed to Tiemo Woelken, or my comment would be, this is actually very worrisome. We have now, as John puts it here, 2 drugs that will not come to Europe despite being new innovation and touching some of the important antimicrobial resistances that are out there already, and especially in Europe, in Southern and Eastern Europe, very prominent. And now we don't have access to this. This is extremely frightening, I have to admit. And is this actually known to the members of the European Parliament and the member states that they're lacking access to life-saving drugs? Tiemo, I think you froze. Fortunately, we cannot hear you anymore.
So let me pick up. I had heard of this, but I don't understand all the reasons behind it. But it is one of the things that worries me, that for all drugs, that in each country, the companies have to go through the registration, and that is an expensive business. And you begin to say, how big is the market and how worthwhile is it to do it? And for things like antibiotics, this then becomes a very important issue. Because everyone everywhere needs them. More people die of lack of access to antibiotics at the moment than of resistance. It's just that should cross over if we go on as we are.
Yeah. Okay, I think, we are already 5 minutes over the time of this very, very lively and great panel. I guess in the interest of time, I will make everyone aware that some of the speakers, myself, Dame Sally Davies, I think also Catharina, I'm not sure if Evan can still do it. We are here in the coffee room, in the virtual coffee room, as you call it, to answer further questions. I think we also wanted to quickly have the organizing team, Sandra Wishing from Biocom again on to announce that they will also be in a coffee room if people want to express their gratitude for this great conference or give also suggestions for the future editions of this. I personally truly hope that we can go back to 3D and real life meetings and not only virtual, because we enjoy tremendously the interaction in this field of AMR that is already very collaborative, and we can further improve on this as well. So thank you very much for this panel. Sandra, are you still coming on to say something, or are we just going to the coffee rooms that are visible in the chat?
Yeah. Marc, I'm going to have to say goodbye. I have to rush off, but thank you very much for your leadership here, and look forward to working with all of you as we continue to push this forward. Applause, very much so.
Thank you very much for your participation, Evan, and have a good rest of the day.
Thank you all.
We just have Tiemo back here. Great to have you back. Tiemo, we had this one question still, maybe we can still address this before we leave to the coffee room, around this really grave situation that Europe is already lacking access to the two of the newest antibiotics that have come to market, addressing some of the critical resistance issues that are especially prominent actually in the European continent, in the south and east. And how aware is the Parliament and even the member states of this grave situation?
Well, first of all, apologies, but it's always dangerous to invite someone who needs to rely on German internet connections. Unfortunately, if I'm honest, I wasn't aware of this. So it's the first time I realize it. So thanks for raising awareness for me. And this again is, I think, though a point on the member states level. But as I know now about it, we will investigate further on that.
Thank you, Tiemo. And I think with this now, really, we, if everyone that has still time and wants to ask further questions, we meet in this virtual coffee room. You'll find it in the chat, some chats above the last ones, the conference organizers. It's the link to the Meet EIT. And thank you.
Hello, everybody. Sorry for the on the last minute there was a technical problem with our camera here, but yeah, I thank everybody for joining this whole week, and that you participated in more than 20 sessions, and we had more than 100 speakers. And yeah, hopefully we will see next year in person. We all don't know. We hope. We will try to organize a meeting in Berlin if possible. If not, we will find another solution as we did this year. So thank you, everybody. And also, if you have any feedback on the digital delivery of the conference, please let us know. We have also an own Jitsi coffee room from our side. So if you just want to say hello or bye or whatever you want, then please join us. But of course, you are also invited to meet the 3 speakers who are now available in her rooms. So I say bye-bye to everyone, and yeah, keep going. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.